The moment he placed our baby in my arms, I thought it was a miracle. But it was a miracle bought at an auction. I'm Reagan Knight, a single mom who was desperate enough to be sold to an Arab billionaire just to save my son. But what I discovered in his mansion wasn't just about money or even a child. It was a secret that shattered everything I thought I knew. What would you do if your only way out was into a gilded cage? Tell me in the comments. Listen to my story. My fingers trembled, not from the biting chill of the late autumn air, but from the raw, soul-deep terror that had become my constant companion. I remember the worn, frayed edges of Ethan's favorite blanket, clutched in my hand, a small, fragile comfort against the monumental despair that had driven me to this point. I was standing in front of a building that looked utterly innocuous on the outside, a nondescript brownstone tucked away on a quiet street in a part of the city I barely recognized. But I knew what happened inside. It wasn't an art gallery or a private club or any of the legitimate facades I'd seen on my way here. This was a place where desperation met depravity, where human lives were given price tags. And I, Reagan Knight, a woman who once dreamed of art and literature, was about to become one of them. The past few months had been a relentless avalanche. First, the medical bills for Ethan's pneumonia, a terrifying week-long hospital stay where every beep of a monitor felt like a countdown to financial ruin. Then the eviction notice tacked onto our peeling apartment door, its stark white paper a cruel contrast to the faded paint, giving us precisely 30 days to disappear. And then the crushing news from the school counselor, Mrs. Jenkins, her voice heavy with regret. That funding for the special needs program Ethan desperately relied on had been cut. Without that extra support, without the dedicated aide who understood his unique way of seeing the world, he'd flounder, get lost in the system. Every avenue I'd explored, every job application, every friend I'd begged, every odd job I'd scraped together, from dog walking to late-night data entry, had led me to this dead end. I remembered a particularly grueling shift, cleaning a fancy downtown restaurant after closing, scrubbing grease off industrial stovetops, my hands aching, my back screaming, only to realize the meager pay barely covered Ethan's inhaler prescription for the month. My reflection in the rain-streaked window of the brownstone showed a woman I barely recognized. Hollow eyes, hair perpetually in a messy bun, a permanent crease of worry etched between my brows. For Ethan, I whispered, the mantra that had become my lifeline, my only shield against the shame, against the gnawing voice that called me a failure. Walking through those ornate, heavy doors felt like crossing a threshold into a nightmare. The air inside was thick with an unsettling mix of expensive cologne, nervous sweat, and a subtle, cloying floral scent that felt utterly out of place, like burying a lie under a mountain of potpourri. It was opulent in a way that screamed old money, deep mahogany, hushed carpets, antique tapestries, but whispered hidden secrets. Velvet drapes, heavy and light-blocking, shrouded the tall windows, contributing to the clandestine atmosphere. I could hear hushed whispers, the clink of ice in crystal glasses, distant, polite laughter that sounded brittle and insincere. It was a perverse masquerade ball, a twisted high society event, and I was the unmasked exhibit, stripped bare in my desperation. I saw other women milling about, a silent sorority of the damned. Some had eyes as wide and desperate as mine, others carried a chilling resignation, like they'd long accepted their fate. A few, though, walked with an almost defiant confidence, a calculated allure that made my stomach churn with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Each woman carried her own untold story of choices made and paths closed, each a testament to a world where human value was measured in cold, hard currency. My own story, my love for Ethan, my fierce protectiveness, felt cheapened, reduced to a mere transaction, a bargaining chip in a game I never wanted to play. My heart hammered against my ribs when my name, Reagan Knight, echoed through the hushed hall, amplified by a surprisingly sophisticated sound system. It was my turn. The stage lights, blinding and relentless, instantly pinned me like a specimen under a microscope. I felt a wave of nausea, the kind that steals your breath and makes your vision swim, the room tilting precariously. My dress, a borrowed black number from a thrift store, slightly too tight in the bust and too loose in the waist, suddenly felt like a cheap costume in a play I hadn't auditioned for, exposed under the harsh glare. The auctioneer, a man with a slick, almost reptilian smile and eyes that darted like a predator's, began his spiel. His voice, unctuous and syrupy, extolled my virtues with sickeningly flowery language. A true picture of American resilience, he droned, potential for unparalleled devotion, a vessel of untapped potential. Each word was a fresh stab to my dignity, a grotesque simplification of my entire existence. I just tried to focus on a single point in the vast, shadowed audience, a dark, empty space beyond the first few rows, to stop my knees from buckling, to keep the tears from overflowing. Then a voice deep and resonant, utterly devoid of inflection, cut through the murmurs, silencing the room like a thunderclap. It was low, commanding, and instantly drew every eye. $5 million. Not the 1 million I'd vaguely heard from hushed whispers, the supposed going rate for a transaction like this, but 5. My head snapped towards the source, my gaze instantly drawn to him as if pulled by an invisible string. He sat in the very front row, a figure carved from granite, radiating an almost palpable aura of controlled power. His tailored suit seemed to absorb the light, making him a stark silhouette against the dimness of the vast room. His face was sharp, chiseled, framed by dark, impeccably styled hair that caught the occasional gleam from the distant stage lights. His eyes, even from that distance, felt like cold steel, dissecting me, evaluating me, missing nothing. Julian Vance. The name was whispered by a woman next to me, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. A name I'd only ever heard in hushed tones on financial news channels, associated with sprawling corporations, impenetrable global markets, and unfathomable wealth. He wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan, a force of nature, a man who moved mountains with a single command, and he had just bought me. The gavel fell, a dull thud that echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room, sealing my fate with a finality that snatched the air from my lungs. I was no longer Reagan Knight, struggling single mother, desperately clinging to threads of hope. I was property, his property, and the nightmare had just begun. The air in Julian Vance's private office was as sterile and cold as a surgical suite. A stark, almost brutal, contrast to the oppressive velvet and hushed chaos of the auction hall. It smelled faintly of expensive leather and polished wood, with a metallic tang that made me think irrationally of money, cold, hard, untouchable. I sat rigidly on a plush leather chair, its softness doing nothing to ease the tension coiling in my stomach. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, nails digging into my palms, trying to project an air of composure I was far, far from feeling. My mind was still reeling from the sudden, deafening fall of the gavel, the finality of it. Across a massive, gleaming mahogany desk, a piece of furniture so vast it felt like a battlefield, sat Julian. His posture was as unyielding as the marble statue of a Roman emperor positioned behind him, a chillingly apt comparison, I thought. He wasn't overtly intimidating in a theatrical way, no booming voice or grand gestures, but his presence filled the room, radiating an almost palpable aura of controlled power, of absolute command. Every movement he made was deliberate, every word carefully chosen, like pieces in a complex chess game where I was clearly the pawn already captured. He slid a thick, bound document across the desk. It wasn't a mere contract. It was a tome, its dark cover embossed with a subtle, unfamiliar crest. Each page, cream-colored and heavy, was filled with dense legalese that swam before my eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible script. "This outlines the terms of our arrangement, Ms. Knight," he said, his voice deep, smooth, utterly devoid of emotion, like water flowing over stone. "I trust you've had time to review the preliminary draft." My mind reeled. Preliminary draft? I'd barely glanced at a 2-page summary given to me by a sharp-suited intermediary. A man whose eyes seemed to hold no warmth, no flicker of empathy, who looked like he moonlighted as a hitman. That summary, deliberately vague now that I looked back, had been a cruel appetizer to this horrifying feast. The full, crushing weight of what I'd just done, what I was about to commit to, pressed down on me, stealing my breath. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and nodded mutely. He began to explain, his words precise and chillingly detached, cutting through the silence like shards of glass. "My family line, the Vances," he started, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, as if reciting a well-rehearsed script, "faces a unique challenge. A genetic marker dormant for generations has resurfaced. It's not a simple recessive gene, Ms. Knight. It's an intricate sequence tied to specific biological timings." He paused, his eyes finally meeting mine, cold and assessing. "Without an heir who passes specific genetic criteria, born within a precise window determined by ancient astrological alignments and modern biological markers, our legacy, our very enterprise, could face irreversible dissolution. It's a matter of immense importance, not just to me but to centuries of Vance history." He spoke of genetic markers, bloodlines, and a time-sensitive ancestral prophecy, as if discussing quarterly earnings reports or the fluctuating stock market. It wasn't just about having a child. It was about having the right child, a perfect biological specimen meticulously engineered to fulfill an ancient, almost mystical family obligation. This wasn't vanity, this felt like destiny or perhaps a curse. A chilling thought that my future, and the future of my unborn child, was dictated by stars and obscure family lore. I forced myself to read the first few clauses, my eyes scanning past the impenetrable legal jargon for the parts that truly mattered to me, to us. My breath hitched in my chest, a small painful gasp, as I reached the core of the agreement. The horrifying truth laid bare in stark, uncompromising terms. The contributor agrees to undergo all necessary medical procedures, including in vitro fertilization, and carry the pregnancy to term. Upon birth, the child shall be immediately and solely in the custody of the recipient, Julian Vance. All parental rights, claims, and visitation privileges of the contributor shall be irrevocably relinquished. A one-time payment of $5 million US dollars shall be transferred to the contributor's designated account upon the successful birth and transfer of the child. My gaze snapped up from the document, blurring slightly with unshed tears. You want me to have a child and just hand it over? My voice was a shaky whisper, barely audible in the cavernous office, raw with disbelief. Julian's steel-gray eyes met mine, unwavering, showing not a flicker of empathy. I require an heir, he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. The child will be raised under the Vance name, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. After the birth, you will leave. The contract makes that undeniably clear. His lack of any discernible emotion was almost more unsettling than outright cruelty. He truly saw me as a biological vessel, a means to an end, a temporary inconvenience, a transaction with a very high price tag. His gaze wasn't malicious, but utterly clinical, like a surgeon assessing a procedure. A wave of icy indignation washed over me, momentarily eclipsing my fear, igniting a spark of defiance I didn't know I still possessed. I can't do this, I cried, my voice rising, cracking with the force of my raw emotion. I won't abandon my own child. I pushed back from the desk, the plush leather chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound harsh and jarring in the otherwise silent room. Julian's eyes narrowed just perceptibly, but his voice remained steady, a dangerous calm before a storm. MS. Knight, he began, his tone a silken thread of menace, you entered this auction of your own volition. You understood the nature of the transaction. The sum provided is substantial, more than enough to secure your son's future, as you stated was your primary motivation. He pulled out a sleek, thin tablet from a drawer, its screen glowing with an eerie luminescence, and began flicking through files. Your son, Ethan, his medical bills, your eviction, your desire to provide him with stability, all documented. You were fully aware of the terms, the consequences. You signed an initial agreement stating your comprehension. The cold, undeniable logic of his words, backed by the undeniable facts of my misery, was a sharp knife to my heart, twisting the blade. He had done his homework. He knew my weaknesses, my every desperate plea, every point of leverage he held over me. He knew exactly what had driven me to that auction block. My resolve crumbled. The defiance withered under the crushing weight of reality. The innocent, hopeful face of Ethan, his bright, trusting eyes, flashed before me. His future, it was always about his future. His laughter, his small hand in mine, his absolute dependence on me, it was all that mattered. The $5 million, an abstract number a moment ago, transformed into tangible solutions. A comfortable apartment, specialists for Ethan's schooling, no more fearing eviction, no more rationing food. With a heavy, suffocating heart, a heart that felt like a stone plummeting into an endless abyss, I picked up the pen. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with the unspoken promises and the crushing betrayals of my life. It was a pen that signed away not just a part of me, not just my maternal rights to a child yet unconceived, but a future I hadn't yet imagined, a life I was sacrificing for another. My signature looked alien, shaky, and uncertain on the crisp white paper, a grotesque caricature of my name, sealing a pact with the devil. Julian took the document, his lips barely curving into something that might have been a ghost of a satisfied smile, a fleeting, almost imperceptible tremor of triumph. Very well, he said, his voice returning to its calm, authoritative tone. Tomorrow morning you will undergo the necessary medical examinations. Afterwards you will be transported to my primary residence. Rest now, MS Knight, you'll need it. He stood, a silent dismissal, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over me, leaving me utterly alone in the oppressive quiet of the office. I stared at my trembling hand, the ghost of the pen still heavy in my fingers, wondering if I had just signed my soul away, not just for Ethan's future, but for an eternity of regret. The next day, a sleek black limousine, so long it seemed to stretch into the gray, drizzly morning like a small train, idled silently outside the rundown apartment building I still, for a few more hours, called home. Its polished surface reflected the muted light, making everything around it. The peeling paint of my building, the overflowing dumpster at the curb, the faded brick of the neighboring structures, looked duller, more insignificant, almost erased. Saying goodbye to Ethan had been a knife to the gut, swift and agonizing, each second a fresh twist of the blade. He'd been so small, clutching his worn teddy bear Mr. Snuggles to his chest. His confusion was clear in his wide, trusting eyes as I knelt down to his level, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mommy going bye-bye?" he'd asked, his voice a tiny, innocent plea that pierced my very soul. "Just for a little while, sweetie," I'd choked out, tears burning my eyes but refusing to fall, desperate to spare him the sight of my grief. I hugged him fiercely, imprinting the feel of his small, warm body against mine, knowing with a chilling certainty that this was just the first of many goodbyes, each one tearing a new piece from my heart. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman who'd seen me through countless struggles, from late rent to Ethan's scraped knees, stood by the door, her face a mask of concern. She'd promised to look after him, to be there for him until the arrangements were finalized, until the money from the auction could truly secure his future. Her pitying gaze, however, was almost as hard to bear as my own grief. It felt like she was looking at a ghost already. The ride to Julian Vance's primary residence was a blur of muted luxury, a silent cocoon of leather and tinted glass. The limo's windows acted as an impenetrable shield, cutting me off from the outside world, from the reality I was leaving behind, from the poverty and struggle that had driven me to this unthinkable choice. I watched the city morph from familiar grime and bustling streets to manicured lawns, then to expansive, sprawling estates hidden behind towering hedges and ornate gates. Each mile seemed to pull me further away from my old life, from everything I knew and loved. Finally, the car turned onto a private, winding road, flanked by towering iron gates that parted silently, almost magically, revealing a serpentine drive through perfectly sculpted gardens, a landscape so immaculate it looked less like nature and more like a carefully crafted stage set. And then through a clearing in the perfectly trimmed trees it emerged, the mansion. Not just a house, no, it was a fortress, a sprawling monument to power and wealth, vast and imposing enough to swallow a small town whole. It was a dizzying fusion of classic European architecture, think grand arches and soaring columns, and sharp, modern minimalist design, all clean lines, towering glass walls, and a facade of ancient, dark stone that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It was breathtaking, yes, in its sheer scale and audacious opulence, but more than that, it was imposing and utterly, terrifyingly alien. This wasn't a home. It was a kingdom, and I was merely a subject, acquired. Stepping inside felt like entering a museum exhibit I was forbidden to touch, a sacred space where my very presence felt like a sacrilege. The grand foyer was vast, echoing with the soft, almost imperceptible click of my heels on polished marble floors that gleamed like still water. Sunlight, filtered through a towering skylight far above, illuminated a massive, abstract sculpture that dominated the center of the hall, its sharp angles catching the light in unsettling ways. Every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a gallery, roped off from common hands. Every carpet, thick and plush, felt like a priceless work of art, too exquisite to walk upon. My own worn clothes, the ones I'd packed in a small duffel bag that suddenly felt pitifully inadequate, felt like a blatant insult to the grandeur surrounding me, a jarring note in a meticulously orchestrated symphony of wealth. I was led by a stern-faced woman in a crisp, dark uniform, her posture ramrod straight, presumably the head housekeeper. She moved with an efficiency that bordered on robotic, her expression unreadable. She guided me through a labyrinth of silent corridors, past rooms I only glimpsed through open doors. A library with impossibly high shelves stretching to the vaulted ceilings, filled with what looked like ancient leather-bound tomes. A formal dining room that could seat 50, each place setting gleaming with silver and crystal. A sprawling art gallery, its walls adorned with what I could only assume were masterpieces. It was a palace designed for an emperor, for a dynasty, not for a struggling single mother about to become a human incubator. My suite was equally opulent, a sprawling space that could have comfortably housed my entire old apartment and then some. A king-sized bed, an island in a sea of carpet, dominated the center, covered in layers of silk and velvet in muted, tasteful tones. There was a private sitting area with a roaring fireplace, a large walk-in closet that felt like its own small boutique, and a bathroom larger than my old kitchen, complete with a massive soaking tub that promised endless depths, and a rainforest showerhead that seemed to span the entire ceiling. On the bed, meticulously laid out with an almost surgical precision, were clothes and accessories that looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine. Tailored loungewear so soft it felt like liquid against my skin, elegant dresses that shimmered with quiet luxury, soft cashmere sweaters in rich, deep hues. Clearly, my previous wardrobe, patched and mended, was deemed utterly unfit for the Vance standard. It was another stark reminder of my new status, a prized possession, to be dressed and presented according to their exacting specifications. A woman with a kind, unassuming face, perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s, entered the room carrying a tray with delicate pastries and a steaming pot of herbal tea. Her eyes, framed by gentle wrinkles, held a warmth that was startling in this cold, perfect environment, like an unexpected ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. She introduced herself as Mrs. Albright, the personal assistant assigned to my care, her voice soft and compassionate, a stark contrast to Julian's hard edges. "If you need anything at all, Ms. Knight," she said, her tone gentle, "I'll be just down the hall. My quarters are connected via the service entrance for immediate assistance, day or night." I thanked her, my voice still a little shaky, a whisper of the raw emotion I was struggling to contain. She seemed genuinely concerned, her gaze lingering on my face for a moment longer than strictly necessary, as if trying to gauge my true state of mind to offer a silent reassurance. But even her kindness, a small, flickering flame in the vast emptiness of the mansion, couldn't shake the pervasive, chilling feeling of being a stranger, an intruder, a purchased commodity in this gilded cage. Every gilded knob, every shimmering fabric, every perfect flower arrangement screamed of a freedom I no longer possessed, of a life that was now utterly beyond my reach. My mind kept replaying Ethan's little face, his innocent plea as I left him, wondering if he was okay, if he understood, if he could ever forgive me for this unforgivable choice. The silence of the mansion was deafening, a constant reminder of my new reality, so far removed from the comforting cacophony of my old life, from the street noise and the familiar hum of our small, crowded apartment. I felt like a rare, exotic bird with broken wings, placed in a beautiful, ornate cage, yearning for a sky I might never reach again, the bars of gold feeling heavier than iron. The days at the mansion settled into a surreal, isolating routine, a gilded monotony. My mornings began precisely at 7 a.m. with a gentle tap on the door from Mrs. Albright, her soft voice a quiet prelude to the day. She'd bring a tray with a light, exquisitely prepared breakfast, delicate fruit tarts, perfectly brewed herbal tea, never coffee, a subtle reminder of my new reality, my controlled existence. Then came the medical team, a rotating cast of impeccably dressed doctors and nurses, each as polished and precise as the sterile instruments they wielded. They conducted thorough, almost clinical examinations. They were polite, professional, and utterly detached, treating me not as a person, but as a valuable biological specimen, a carefully monitored project. Every blood test, every ultrasound, every injection was meticulously documented, noted, and filed away into what I assumed were the Vance family archives. My body, once solely mine, now felt like a public project, scrutinized and managed with scientific precision, every function recorded, every symptom dissected. I endured it all, focusing solely on the distant promise of Ethan's future, a faint flickering echo of the $5 million that would, theoretically, free him from the shadows I was now living in, the ones that had consumed my past. I rarely saw Julian. His presence was a phantom in the mansion, a deep voice sometimes heard from his distant study, a fleeting glimpse of him in the vast, echoing corridors, always moving with purpose, always surrounded by hushed efficiency. He was a busy man, consumed by his empire, or so I assumed. A titan of industry with no time for the intricacies of human emotion. When we did cross paths, it was brief and formal. He would offer a curt nod, a question about my comfort or progress delivered with the same detached professionalism as his medical team, his words carefully measured, devoid of any genuine warmth. I was an item on his checklist, a project to be overseen, an investment requiring periodic review. It reinforced the purely transactional nature of our arrangement, a bitter pill to swallow despite the luxurious surroundings that screamed of everything I lacked in personal freedom. It was during these lonely, introspective days that Mrs. Albright became my unexpected confidante, a subtle beacon of humanity in this cold, perfect world. She would bring me my meals, offer me books from the mansion's vast library, a dizzying collection spanning centuries and continents, and occasionally linger for a few moments, offering snippets of polite conversation. At first, I was wary, suspecting her of being Julian's eyes and ears, a silent spy reporting my every mood. But her genuine kindness, her quiet empathy, slowly chipped away at my defenses, revealing a woman who simply saw me Reagan, not just the contributor. She spoke of the Vance family with a quiet respect, a reverence almost, but always with an undercurrent of sadness, a faint melancholy in her tone. "Mr. Julian," she said one afternoon, her voice soft as she straightened a pillow on my sofa. "He carries a heavy burden, Ms. Knight, more than most people know really. The Vance name, it's a lot to bear." She never elaborated, never offered specifics, but her words planted a seed of curiosity in my mind. Was there more to this man than the ruthless exterior he presented, the cold, calculating billionaire who had purchased me? Was his relentless pursuit of an heir driven by something deeper than mere obligation, something even he might be a prisoner of? One particularly restless night, around 3 in the morning, sleep refused to claim me. My mind raced with anxieties about Ethan, about the child growing inside me, about the impossible future. Unable to lie still, I found myself wandering the silent corridors of the mansion, my footsteps barely a whisper on the plush carpets. The mansion was breathtakingly beautiful under the moonlight, bathed in a silvery glow that transformed its grandiosity into something almost ethereal, less imposing and more mysterious. I noticed a faint, persistent light emanating from beneath a heavy, ornate oak door at the far end of a seldom-used wing. Julian's study, I realized. Curiosity, a dangerous trait I usually suppress for self-preservation, got the better of me. The thought of knowing more, of understanding the man who held my destiny, was a powerful draw. I crept closer, the profound silence of the night amplifying the soft, rhythmic scratch of pen on paper or perhaps a stylus on a screen. I cautiously peeked through a narrow crack in the door, just enough to see inside. Julian was hunched over a massive desk, illuminated by a single, focused lamp surrounded by towering stacks of documents, financial reports, and what looked like ancient leather-bound ledgers. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded on the back of his chair, and his face, usually so composed, was etched with a profound weariness, a deep-set fatigue I hadn't seen before. He looked less like a titan of industry, and more like a man drowning in responsibilities, weighed down by burdens too heavy for any one person. There was a vulnerability there, a fleeting glimpse of a human burdened by the very power he wielded, a crack in the impenetrable granite facade. It was a jarring image, one that resonated with an unexpected pang in my chest. A few weeks later, a profound, undeniable shift occurred within me. The first signs of life stirred. It began as a faint flutter, like a butterfly's wing brushing softly against the inside of my stomach, then a subtle, insistent wave of nausea in the mornings that left me reaching for Mrs. Albright's calming ginger tea. It was real. A new life, a tiny, demanding presence was growing inside me, utterly dependent on me. And with that realization, my focus instantly shifted from my own despair, my own terrifying circumstances, to this fragile hope, this burgeoning miracle. This was a child, not a commodity. My child for these precious 9 months anyway. The thought filled me with a fierce, almost primal protectiveness, a love that transcended the contract, the overwhelming wealth, the coldness of my surroundings. It was a love that would, I knew with a painful certainty, inevitably lead to the most profound heartbreak when the time came to let go, when this beautiful, fragile connection would be severed. But for now, for these moments, for these silent conversations between mother and nascent life, it was purely, overwhelmingly mine. The paradox of my situation twisted in my gut. I was carrying this child for a man I barely knew, a man who intended to take it from me. Yet the bond forming between us was undeniable, visceral, and utterly, terrifyingly real. I found myself staring at my slightly rounded stomach in the ornate mirror, a silent promise forming on my lips. I would protect this life, this tiny, precious being, even if I couldn't protect myself from the pain that was sure to follow. The mansion, once a symbol of my imprisonment, now felt, strangely, like a temporary sanctuary for the burgeoning miracle within me. A protective shell around my most vulnerable, most precious secret. My growing pregnancy brought subtle, yet significant shifts in the mansion's atmosphere, a slow, almost imperceptible lightening of the oppressive grandeur. More surprisingly, it began to soften the edges of my interactions with Julian. The initial formality, a thick wall between us, started to thaw, much like ice melting under a slow, insistent spring sun. I found myself observing him more closely, trying to decipher the man behind the impenetrable facade he presented to the world, to me. He was still consumed by his work, his days crammed with urgent calls and hushed meetings that echoed through the vast halls, but I started to notice patterns. He was often in his study late into the night, the solitary glow of his lamp a beacon in the mansion's dark quiet, burning until the early hours. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the faint, melancholic strains of classical music drifting from his private quarters, a surprising contrast to his austere, disciplined exterior, hinting at a hidden world of emotion. One particularly difficult evening, I was struck by a punishing wave of morning sickness, or rather evening sickness as it turned out to be. The nausea was relentless, stealing my breath, leaving me weak and trembling. Mrs. Albright, ever attentive, ever the silent guardian angel, was quickly by my side, her cool hand on my forehead, offering gentle remedies and comforting words, coaxing me to sip some calming ginger tea. Julian, on his way back from a late meeting, his briefcase still clutched in his hand, happened to pass by my open door. He paused, his usual detached expression flickering, replaced by a momentary, almost startled concern. "Are you unwell, Ms. Knight?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, not clinical, not formal, but genuinely questioning. He didn't just ask, he looked at me, truly looked, his gaze lingering as if seeing me for the first time as more than just a biological function, more than just a means to an end. He instructed Mrs. Albright to ensure I had everything I needed, his tone surprisingly gentle. Then with a hint of awkwardness, almost a suggestion rather than a command, he added, perhaps some fresh air would help. The conservatory is usually quite peaceful this time of night. The night blooming jasmine, it can be quite soothing. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible in its subtlety, but it was a distinct crack in his armor, a hint of genuine empathy that startled me. Following his subtle suggestion, drawn by an inexplicable pull, I found myself wandering towards the mansion's vast conservatory. It was a glass-domed paradise, even in the moonlight, filled with exotic plants whose silhouettes cast eerie shadows and the calming, constant sound of a hidden fountain's gentle gurgle. To my surprise, Julian was already there. He wasn't working, wasn't on a call. He was tending to a delicate orchid, its petals a vibrant splash of color in the dimness, his large, imposing hands surprisingly gentle as he misted its leaves. He seemed to lose himself in the task, his shoulders relaxed, his posture no longer rigid. It was a stark contrast to the tightly coiled tension he usually carried. "Do you enjoy gardening?" I ventured, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled around us. A silence less awkward, more companionable than I would have thought possible. He glanced up, a flash of surprise in his eyes before they softened, a flicker of something almost shy. "It helps me organize my thoughts," he replied, his gaze returning to the orchid, his voice quiet. "The natural world has a logic, a quiet resilience, a predictable beauty that business rarely affords. It's grounding." We spoke for nearly an hour that night, not about the contract or the pregnancy, but about the resilience of nature, the complexities of life beyond balance sheets and market trends. He revealed a surprising depth, a quiet intellect that went beyond mere financial acumen, speaking of botany and philosophy with an unexpected passion. He mentioned his late mother's love for the conservatory, hinting at a softer side, a past grief he still carried, a profound sorrow hidden beneath layers of control. During another instance, Mrs. Albright, while helping me select some comfortable reading material from the mansion's sprawling library, recounted a story about Julian's childhood. Her voice was tinged with a quiet fondness, a touch of melancholy. "Mr. Julian was always very serious," she began, her gaze distant as she straightened a row of leather-bound books. "Even as a boy, he carried the weight of the Vance name, the expectations of generations. His parents, they instilled in him a profound sense of duty, of responsibility to the family legacy. After their tragic passing, a sudden accident, when he was just 20, he took on everything, the businesses, the estates, and the legacy itself. He never really had a childhood, not like other boys. Just a rapid ascension into responsibility, into a role he was born into, but perhaps not ready for." Her words painted a picture of a young man burdened by immense, almost impossible expectations, a life defined by obligation rather than choice, a life devoid of innocent joy. It deepened my understanding, complicating the villainous, cold image I had initially formed of him. Perhaps behind that rigid facade, that unyielding exterior, there was a man as broken as I was, just in a different, more gilded way. One morning, I woke to find a collection of books neatly arranged on my bedside table. Among them were a few classic novels I'd mentioned casually enjoying during one of my conversations with Mrs. Albright, books I hadn't touched since college, their pages a distant echo of a life I'd thought was long gone. And nestled among them, a specific poetry collection that had been a particular favorite of my college years, a small, obscure volume I never would have expected Julian Vance to even know existed. He must have remembered my fleeting comment, or perhaps Mrs. Albright had, but the gesture felt undeniably his. It was quiet, unassuming, yet it spoke volumes. He saw me not just as a means to an end, a contributor in his grand scheme, but as a person with preferences, with a past, with a mind, with quiet joys. A warmth bloomed in my chest, a dangerous, confusing warmth that felt both comforting and terrifying. Was this manipulation, a calculated softening of the edges to ensure my compliance, or was it care? The lines between buyer and commodity, between a cold, undeniable transaction and a budding human connection, were beginning to blur, swirling into an unsettling ambiguity. My heart ached with the irony of it all, finding kindness, even tenderness, in the most unlikely of places from the man who held my future, and by extension my current pregnancy, in his meticulously gloved hands. I found myself thinking of the child growing inside me, and for the first time, a flicker of fear about separating from Julian, not just the baby, joined the agonizing fear of separating from Ethan. This was getting complicated, dangerously so, and my emotions were spiraling into a territory I never anticipated. The request came unexpectedly, delivered by Mrs. Albright with her usual gentle demeanor, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet of my opulent suite. Mr. Julian would like to know if you'd be amenable to a supervised visit with your son Ethan, she said, her eyes kind, watching my reaction closely. He believes it might alleviate some stress, which he deems beneficial for your current condition. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my throat and my heart. A visit? After weeks of isolation, months of the agonizing, visceral separation from Ethan, it felt like a cruel joke, a twisted form of psychological torture, or perhaps an unexpected reprieve from my gilded imprisonment. My heart leaped with a frantic, desperate hope, quickly followed by a cold, sharp wave of skepticism that splashed over me like icy water. What was his angle? Was this simply another calculated form of control, a manipulation to ensure the pregnancy progressed smoothly, to protect his investment? Or was it just possibly a genuine act of compassion, a flicker of humanity from the man I was still struggling to understand? I clung to the latter, desperate for a sliver of kindness in this transactional nightmare. The arrangements were meticulously covert, almost clandestine, as if the meeting itself was a forbidden secret. I was driven in a different, less ostentatious car, a discreet black sedan that blended seamlessly into traffic, to a quiet park in a different neighborhood, one far from my old life, far from any familiar faces. Julian did not accompany me inside the park, choosing to remain in the car, parked discreetly down the street. Ostensibly it was for my privacy to avoid any undue attention, but I suspected it was more about maintaining his own detachment, his carefully constructed distance from the messy realities of human emotion. Mrs. Albright, however, was by my side, a reassuring, solid presence, her hand resting lightly on my arm as we walked towards the playground. And then I saw him. Ethan. He was playing on the swings, a small, solitary figure, his laughter carried faintly on the breeze, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. My throat seized up, a knot of emotion tightening in my chest, tears stinging my eyes, threatening to spill over. He looked bigger, somehow taller, and yet still so utterly, irrevocably my baby. Mommy, his voice so clear and pure, so filled with unadulterated joy, cut through the park noises, the squeals of other children, the rustle of leaves like a melody, a forgotten song returning to me. He launched himself off the swing, running towards me with a whirlwind of joyful energy, his little legs pumping, his arms outstretched. He crashed into me, clinging to me with an intensity that threatened to buckle my knees, his small hands clutching my shirt as if he never wanted to let go. I buried my face in his soft hair, inhaling the familiar, intoxicating scent of sun and childhood, of innocence and warmth, trying to memorize every detail of this stolen, precious moment to imprint it onto my very soul. We sat on a park bench, his small hand nestled securely in mine, as he chattered excitedly about his new dinosaur toys, his kindergarten friends, the drawings he'd made that week. He asked if I was coming home, his eyes wide and innocent, filled with a trusting hope that shattered my heart. The lie formed on my lips, heavy and bitter, a poison I had to swallow. Soon, my love. Mommy's on a very important trip for work, but I'll be back before you know it. The word work felt like a grotesque mockery of my true situation, a flimsy shield against an unbearable truth. He seemed to accept it, his little mind not yet grasping the complexities of adult deceit, and my heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I kept glancing towards the idling car, the dark, anonymous sedan parked unobtrusively a block away. Julian sat inside, a dark, still silhouette against the tinted glass. I couldn't discern his expression, couldn't see his eyes, but I felt his gaze, a quiet, analytical presence, heavy and constant. Was he watching for any signs of emotional distress from me? Was he judging my capacity for detachment, my ability to uphold the contract, to eventually surrender what was growing inside me? Or was there a flicker of something else? Perhaps a nascent understanding of the pain he had inflicted, of the profound sacrifice I was making. I clung to the desperate, fragile hope that seeing me with Ethan, witnessing the raw, visceral, undeniable bond of a mother and child, might humanize me to him, might make him question the cold logic of his heir pursuit. The hour flew by, a cruel tease of what I longed for, a brief, tantalizing glimpse of a life I was sacrificing. Saying goodbye again was excruciating, 1,000 tiny cuts to my soul. Ethan cried, his small hands clinging desperately to my dress, his face buried in my side. "Don't go, Mommy, please don't go." His voice was ragged with tears. Mrs. Albright had to gently, firmly peel his small, trembling hands away from me. As I walked back to the car, his heartbroken cries echoed in my ears, tearing at my soul, each sob a fresh wound. Julian remained silent during the ride back, his profile stoic, unreadable. I was a mess, tears streaming down my face, my chest aching with a raw, unbearable pain that felt too big for my body. He offered no comfort, no words of solace, yet his silence felt different now. Less accusatory, less indifferent, more thoughtful, perhaps even burdened. Back at the mansion, I collapsed onto my bed, utterly exhausted, emotionally drained, my body aching with a phantom emptiness where Ethan had been. Julian was waiting for me in the living room, a single glass of water chilled with a lemon slice on the small, elegant coffee table in front of the sofa. He rose as I entered, his gaze lingering on my tear-streaked face. "How is he?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with a genuine concern I hadn't expected, a soft cadence that was entirely new. I sank onto the sofa across from him, feeling utterly vulnerable, stripped bare of all pretense. "He's well," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Happy, but it's hard to leave him, it always is." Julian nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful, a deep contemplation in his steel-gray eyes. "I can imagine," he said. That was all he said. But in that moment, his quiet acknowledgement, his simple words spoke volumes. It was an understanding, a rare, fragile moment of shared humanity that transcended the bounds of our cold contract, of buyer and bought. It felt as though our vulnerability, my raw pain, and his quiet observation brought us infinitesimally closer, bridging the vast chasm between us. But beneath that fragile, newly built bridge, the churning waters of doubt remained. The contract still loomed, unyielding, a stark reminder of the ultimate heartbreak awaiting me. This glimmer of hope, this unexpected tenderness from Julian, was terrifying because it made the inevitable separation, not just from my unborn child, but from this strange, evolving connection with him, even more unbearable. The fragile understanding that had begun to form between Julian and me, that delicate, tentative bridge built on shared vulnerabilities and unexpected kindness, was shattered, or at least profoundly shaken, by a discovery that sent a chill through my very bones. It started subtly, an innocuous detail that pricked at my subconscious like a persistent splinter. I was exploring the vast, antique-filled library one afternoon, seeking a distraction from my increasingly anxious thoughts about the impending birth, about the agonizing separation from my unborn child. My eyes skimmed over dusty tomes and rare manuscripts, their leather bindings cracked with age, when I noticed a small, almost imperceptible discoloration on the spine of a seemingly ordinary book about ancient Near Eastern history. It looked like a faint, greasy smudge, out of place in such a pristine environment. Curious, my fingers traced the imperfection, and I pulled the heavy volume out from its snug spot. Behind it, where the book had sat on the shelf for what must have been decades, was a tiny hidden compartment. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a secret passage to another room, just a small recess barely big enough for a single object, expertly concealed within the intricate woodwork. Inside, nestled on a plush velvet lining, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It felt old, heavy, and radiated a strange, almost unsettling energy, as if holding secrets too dark for the light. My hands trembled, a nervous tremor I couldn't control as I carefully, slowly opened it. Inside lay a single yellowed photograph and a small, leather-bound journal. The photo was faded, its colors muted by time, depicting a young woman who bore a striking, almost uncanny resemblance to Julian. The same strong jawline, the piercing gaze, though her features were softer, her smile brighter, more genuine than I had ever seen on his face. She was undeniably pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, a gesture I now mimicked instinctively with my own hand. Next to her stood a stern-looking man, presumably Julian's father, his expression mirroring Julian's own detached, almost cold demeanor. But what truly sent a jolt of ice through my veins, what made my blood run cold, was the presence of another woman in the background of the photograph. Indistinct but clearly pregnant too, looking away from the camera, her face obscured. And beside her a small child, a boy, about Ethan's age, holding the hand of the stern man. It wasn't just a family photo, it was a family that seemed to mirror my situation, unsettlingly, terrifyingly so. I opened the journal, its pages brittle with age, crackling softly as I turned them. The script was delicate, elegant, clearly the handwriting of the pregnant woman in the photo. It was a diary detailing her life in the mansion, her growing pregnancy, and her interactions with the Vance family, particularly the formidable patriarch. Her name was Amelia. As I read, a horrifying narrative began to unfold, chilling me to the core. Amelia wasn't Julian's mother as I had initially assumed from the striking resemblance. She was another woman like me, brought to the mansion under agonizingly similar circumstances. The journal entries detailed her initial hopes, her burgeoning fears, her growing attachment to the child she carried, and her desperate, heartbreaking attempts to connect with Julian's father, who was equally cold, equally demanding, equally focused solely on the heir. But then the entries became increasingly erratic, scrawled with a frantic urgency, filled with fear and paranoia. She wrote of strange medical procedures, of feeling weak, constantly monitored, constantly watched. The language grew disjointed, desperate. The last entry was chilling, a desperate plea hanging in the silence of the library, resonating with my own burgeoning terror. They say the child is imperfect, not what they needed, not the pure bloodline. I hear them whispering, they will take him. What will they do to me? What about my other child, the one I left behind for this? Oh God, I must get out. The journal ended abruptly, a half-finished sentence, a desperate plea hanging in the silence, her fate left to my imagination. My blood ran cold, a glacial river flowing through my veins. Imperfect, not what they needed. This wasn't just about Julian needing an heir for his empire. There was something far more sinister, something genetically specific, possibly even dangerous, tied to the Vance legacy. The genetic marker he'd mentioned so clinically, the precise window for birth, it wasn't just about lineage, it was about quality control, about genetic purity. My mind raced back to the vague details of his family's unique challenge, the ancestral prophecy. What if this wasn't just a challenge, but a terrifying genetic experiment, a eugenic pursuit cloaked in ancient tradition and immense wealth? What if my child, the one growing inside me, was subjected to the same ruthless evaluation? And what had happened to Amelia and her child? The photo with the other pregnant woman, the young boy, were there other contributors besides Amelia and me? A chilling pattern began to emerge, a dark history of purchased lives and discarded outcomes, of human beings treated as expendable instruments. The opulence of the mansion now felt like a gilded tomb, its beauty a deceptive facade for the horrors within, and I, Reagan Knight, was trapped within its terrifying, suffocating walls. My fragile hope, the tentative connection I had felt with Julian, vanished, turning to absolute, heart-stopping terror. I had to know what had truly happened to Amelia. I had to protect my child. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me, twisting my gut into a painful knot. The journal clutched in my trembling hands felt like a ticking bomb, counting down to an unknown detonation. Every shadow in the opulent room seemed to shift, stretching into monstrous shapes, every distant creak of the old house amplified into a sinister whisper, a chilling murmur against the silence. Amelia's desperate, fragmented words echoed in my mind. Imperfect, not what they needed. What did that truly mean for my baby, the tiny life stirring within me? For me, the vessel carrying this precious cargo? The meticulous medical exams, the almost surgical precision of the doctors, Julian's unwavering, detached efficiency. It all clicked into place, painted with a horrifying new shade, a sinister hue I had been blind to. This wasn't just about an heir. It was about a specific, perhaps even genetically engineered, outcome. And if my child didn't fit their precise, terrifying criteria, if it was deemed imperfect, what then? What became of the failures? I knew with a sudden, chilling clarity that I couldn't confront Julian immediately. I needed more answers, more concrete proof to combat the rising tide of my paranoia. My mind was a buzzing fly in my ear, urging caution, demanding restraint. I began to observe everything with a heightened, almost frantic sense of alert. Mrs. Albright, bless her kind, unsuspecting soul, became an unwitting source of clues, her gentle chatter often containing kernels of information I hadn't realized I needed until now. I noticed her sometimes glancing at old family portraits in the main hall with a wistful, almost melancholic expression, particularly one of Julian's father, Marcus Vance, a man whose stern eyes seemed to follow me. One afternoon, while she was tidying my room, meticulously folding clothes with practiced hands, I casually steered the conversation towards the Vance lineage. Mrs. Albright, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I was admiring the family photos in the hall earlier. Mr. Vance, Julian's father, looked so much like him, and there was a woman next to him. In that portrait with the older boy, was she a relative, perhaps? Mrs. Albright's expression clouded slightly, a subtle shift in her kind face. She paused her folding, her gaze drifting towards the window. Ah, that was Marcus's first wife, Elizabeth, she said, her voice softer, tinged with a delicate sadness. A beautiful, tragic soul. She passed away quite young, not long after Julian's younger brother Daniel was born. Such a terrible loss for the family, so sudden. She paused again, her eyes distant, lost in memory. The Vance family has always been complicated, many expectations, many burdens, especially for the male line, you see, to uphold the legacy. Her words were vague, yet heavily laden with unspoken history, with secrets hinted at but never revealed. The photo I found in the hidden compartment clearly had 2 pregnant women. Who was the other? Was Elizabeth the perfect genetic match, the desired outcome, and Amelia the imperfect one, discarded? The pieces began to connect, forming a terrifying mosaic. My investigation became a clandestine operation, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a primal, fierce need to protect my child, a need that overrode all fear. I started taking mental notes of the mansion's intricate layout, the staff's rigid schedules, the hidden nooks and crannies that might offer a glimpse into the Vance secrets. I noticed a small, unmarked door in the back of Julian's study, tucked almost invisibly behind a heavy velvet tapestry. It was always closed, always locked. One day, to my chilling surprise, I saw Julian's personal assistant, a stoic man named Mr. Finch, emerge from it carrying a sealed, nondescript file, his face as unreadable as ever. My blood ran cold. What was behind that door? What secrets did it conceal? I waited until late one night when the mansion was utterly, profoundly silent, swallowed by the darkness. The only sound was the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the ventilation system, a mechanical heartbeat in the vast emptiness. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to betray me. I knew I needed to get into that room. I remembered Mrs. Albright casually mentioning during a conversation about cleaning supplies that the staff had a master key system for all the private areas. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but desperation lent me a reckless courage I hadn't known I possessed. I crept down to the staff quarters, a separate wing of the mansion I'd only glimpsed through passing doorways. I found the housekeeper's office, thankfully unlocked, and spotted a set of keys on a hook near the door, glinting dully in the faint light filtering from the hallway. My hands shook violently as I grabbed the key ring, the metallic jingle sounding deafeningly loud in the silence. A whispered prayer, ragged and desperate, to a god I hadn't truly believed in for years, escaped my lips. Back in Julian's study, my breath caught in my throat. The key slid into the lock of the hidden door with a soft, almost imperceptible click, a sound that in the oppressive silence echoed like a gunshot. I pushed it open, revealing a narrow, descending staircase leading down into a suffocating darkness below. As I descended, each step a tremor of fear, the air grew colder, heavier, carrying a faint, unsettling metallic scent, like antiseptic and something else, something clinical. The room was not a library or an archive. It was a small, clinical laboratory. Gleaming stainless steel surfaces reflected the faint light from the stairs. Complex machinery hummed with a low thrum, blinking with green and red lights. Rows of refrigerated vials lined shelves, their contents a mystery, but one I dreaded to unravel. And on a large digital screen, glowing with an eerie luminescence that bathed the room in a sickly green light, were complex genetic sequences, family trees diagrammed with intricate lines and annotations, and alongside them detailed medical profiles. One profile in particular made my blood run cold, freezing me in place. Project Legacy Subject Alpha. Outcome failed, genetic anomaly detected. And underneath, a photograph, Amelia, the woman from the journal. My eyes darted frantically across the screen, a chilling realization dawning on me. There were other subjects listed, other failures. It wasn't just Amelia. There had been others before her, a long, grim procession of women. The Vance legacy wasn't a noble lineage, a proud tradition. It was a horrifying eugenics program masked by ancient traditions and cloaked in unfathomable wealth. Julian's genetic marker was a selective filter, ensuring only a child with specific, highly desirable, and perhaps unnaturally modified traits would inherit the Vance empire. And if the child deviated, if it was imperfect, the journal's terrifying implications resonated with chilling clarity. My baby, the innocent life within me, was merely subject beta. I was just a vessel, an experimental incubator in a long line of them brought here for a chilling scientific purpose. The truth hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath, leaving me cold and nauseous, my body trembling uncontrollably. I wasn't just trapped in a gilded cage, I was in a scientific prison, and my unborn child was the next experiment. The walls of the mansion no longer just felt imposing, they felt suffocating, closing in, promising a fate far worse than any poverty I had ever known. Escape, I had to escape. The return to my suite after that horrifying discovery was a blur of adrenaline and cold, paralyzing terror. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. Amelia's desperate words, the chilling labels in the hidden lab, the vague, unsettling pronouncements from Julian and Mrs. Albright. It all confirmed the chilling reality of my situation. Julian Vance wasn't just a cold businessman seeking an heir. He was the unwitting, or perhaps complicit, heir to a twisted legacy. A centuries-old eugenics program meticulously designed to perpetuate a pure bloodline, whatever that truly, terrifyingly meant. My pregnancy, my unborn child, was just another variable in their horrifying equation, another experiment in a long, dark history. The weight of Amelia's journal, now carefully hidden beneath loose floorboards in my luxurious bathroom, felt like a lead weight in my stomach, dragging me down, yet also fueling a desperate resolve. I had to confront him. I had to know the full truth, every dark secret, and somehow against all odds I had to escape. I chose my moment carefully, letting the discovery simmer, planning my attack. That evening, Julian requested my presence for dinner in the informal dining room, a rare occurrence that usually signified a brief, businesslike update on my progress. He was dressed in a casual cashmere sweater, a deep charcoal gray that softened his formidable presence, his demeanor less formal than usual, almost relaxed, as if settling into a domestic routine. He spoke about his day, about a new acquisition for his sprawling business empire, his voice calm and unhurried, almost conversational. He was playing the role of the benevolent patron, the comfortable host, and it made my skin crawl with a visceral repulsion. "Julian," I began, my voice surprisingly steady despite the violent tremor that shook my hands beneath the table, hidden from his view. "I need to ask you something very important, something that can't wait." He paused, a fork midway to his mouth, poised above a perfectly cooked salmon. His gaze sharpened instantly, losing its casual softness, becoming the piercing, analytical stare I was accustomed to. "Yes, Reagan," he said, his tone still even, but with an underlying current of caution. "Is there an issue with your comfort, or perhaps the doctor's latest instructions?" "It's not about that," I said, my voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of righteous anger and deep-seated fear. "It's about Amelia." The air in the room seemed to freeze, the gentle clink of silverware suddenly deafening. Julian's hand lowered slowly, deliberately, the silver fork glinting under the chandelier. His eyes, usually so composed, so unreadable, betrayed a flicker of something unreadable: surprise, alarm, recognition. "Amelia," he repeated, his voice low, dangerously quiet, the calm before a storm. "I'm not familiar with that name." "Don't lie to me," I shot back, a wave of defiance washing over me, fueled by an almost feral protectiveness for my unborn child. "I found her journal in the library, and I found the lab, the one beneath your study, the Project Legacy lab." His face went utterly blank, a mask of stone falling into place. The muscles in his jaw clenched tight and rigid, and his eyes, those striking steel gray eyes, turned to chips of ice, reflecting no warmth, no humanity. "You had no right to trespass." "MS. Knight," he said, his voice no longer calm or soft. It was a low, menacing growl vibrating with suppressed fury. "That area is strictly off-limits. You signed a confidentiality clause." "No right," I scoffed, a bitter broken laugh escaping my lips laced with raw despair. "And what right did your family have to do what they did to her? To all of them, to me, to my child?" I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. I stood, my hands braced against the heavy wood, my body trembling uncontrollably, but my gaze unwavering, locked on his. "Explain it, Julian. Explain Project Legacy. Explain why my baby is just subject beta in your terrifying experiment. Explain what happens if my child is imperfect like Amelia's was. What happened to her, Julian, and what about her child? Did your father just discard them?" The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken threats, with the weight of generations of dark secrets. He slowly rose from his seat, his imposing figure looming over me, his gaze piercing through me, trying to intimidate, trying to break me. "You understand nothing, Reagan," he said, his voice laced with contempt, a sneer twisting his lips. "You are meddling in matters far beyond your comprehension. This is ancient, profound." "I comprehend perfectly," I countered, my voice trembling but holding firm, each word a desperate challenge. "I comprehend that my child's life and mine is on the line. I comprehend that you're perpetuating a twisted, unethical practice, a horrifying eugenics program, and I won't be a part of it, not anymore." Julian took a menacing step towards me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something else, fear of exposure. "You signed a contract," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "A legally binding agreement. You are bound by its terms, you are property." "And what about your terms, Julian?" I challenged, my voice rising, gaining a desperate, furious edge. "What about the terms of human decency? What about the terms of a father's responsibility beyond genetic purity and family legacy? Do you even know what happened to Amelia? Did your father just discard her and her child? Did he simply throw them away when they didn't meet his impossible standards?" His face contorted, a flash of raw, unfiltered pain, of ancient sorrow, crossing his features before it was quickly suppressed, hidden behind his usual mask of cold control. It was a fleeting glimpse, but it confirmed my suspicions. There was more to his coldness, more to this legacy than pure evil. He wasn't just a monster, he was a product of this monster, bound by its chains. "You threatened to expose my family, Reagan?" he asked, his voice now dangerously soft, almost a whisper, laced with a chilling undertone. "You threatened to destroy centuries of Vance's reputation?" "I threatened to expose the truth," I corrected him, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. "I will not let my child become another failed subject. I will not let you take him without understanding every single consequence, every single detail of this monstrous legacy. And I certainly won't leave quietly if you intend to harm him." I have Amelia's journal. I have enough to bring down more than just your family's reputation. I will bring the whole rotten edifice crumbling down. It was a bluff, I knew. The journal was barely enough, a single frantic testimony, and who would believe a desperate woman like me against a man like Julian Vance, a titan of industry with unlimited resources and influence? But I had to try. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for the innocent life stirring within me. For all the Amelias who came before. Julian stared at me, his gaze calculating, assessing, a silent battle raging behind his eyes. The mask of indifference, of cold control, had completely fallen, revealing a complex storm of anger, fear, and something else. A deep, almost ancient sorrow that seemed to emanate from his very core. He truly saw me for the first time, not as a commodity, but as an adversary, a desperate mother. "What do you want, Reagan?" he finally asked, his voice low, resigned, stripped of its usual authority. "What is your price to stay silent? To keep the Vance name from being dragged through the mud?" "My price?" I scoffed, a bitter, defiant laugh escaping my lips, ringing harshly in the silent room. "My price is the truth. The full, unvarnished truth about Amelia, about Daniel, about Project Legacy, about everything. And my price is my child's safety, his freedom, his future. And mine, I want to know everything. Every dark secret, every failed experiment, every discarded life." And then, I paused, letting my words hang heavy in the air. "We will talk about a new kind of agreement. One where I am a mother, not a breeding machine. One where my child is a human being, not a science experiment. You want an heir, Julian? Then you're going to have to do this on my terms, every single one." The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating, the silence heavy with the weight of my demands, my desperate gamble for freedom and for the life growing within me. The silence after my declaration was deafening, hanging heavy and thick in the air like a storm cloud that had finally burst. Julian's mask had fallen completely, shattered into a million pieces, revealing a raw, unfamiliar vulnerability beneath. His eyes, usually cold and impenetrable, were now turbulent pools of conflicting emotions. Anger, frustration, and a profound, bone-deep weariness that seemed to age him decades in an instant. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and raspy, almost hoarse, utterly devoid of its usual authority, like a man confessing a burden too heavy to carry alone any longer. "Sit down, Reagan," he said, his gaze imploring, almost pleading. "Please, we need to talk, all of it." We moved from the formal dining room to his private study, not the main, imposing one I had briefly infiltrated, but a smaller, more intimate space adjacent to it, almost a sanctuary. It was cluttered, surprisingly, with ancient maps spread across a large wooden table, astronomical charts pinned to cork boards, and towering stacks of esoteric books, their spines worn with age. He walked to a polished mahogany bar, his movements slow and deliberate, and poured himself a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. He didn't offer me one, perhaps knowing I wouldn't accept, or perhaps simply lost in his own turmoil. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare, uncharacteristic gesture of disarray, pulling at the perfectly styled strands. "My family," he began, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud might break some ancient spell, "has carried a secret for centuries." He paused, taking a slow sip from his glass, his gaze distant, fixed on a point beyond the ornate windows. "A genetic anomaly, a predisposition to a rare, debilitating neurological disease. It's passed down through the male line, appearing unpredictably, often claiming its victims in their late 20s or early 30s, slowly robbing them of their minds, then their bodies. My great-grandfather suffered from it. My grandfather was spared miraculously, but his brother was not. My father, Marcus, he was obsessed with finding a cure, or at least a way to prevent it from ever manifesting again." He gestured vaguely to an ancient leather-bound tome on a nearby shelf, its pages yellowed and fragile. "Our ancestors, they weren't scientists, no, but they were deeply superstitious, steeped in occult lore. They believed the disease was a curse, a sign of impurity in the bloodline, a punishment for some ancient transgression. They consulted oracles, mystics, even alchemists. Over generations, they developed a theory, a desperate, illogical hope, that a child conceived under specific astrological alignments and possessing certain rare genetic markers could purify the blood, thus halting the disease in future generations. It's ludicrous, I know, he said, a flicker of self-loathing in his eyes, but it became the core of the Vance legacy, an obsession with genetic purity to eradicate a family curse that threatened to consume us all. He continued, his words heavy with a confession he'd clearly held onto for decades, a burden that had twisted his very soul. My father, Marcus, he took it to an extreme, beyond what any sane man would consider. After his first wife, Elizabeth, passed away unexpectedly, she suffered from a rare congenital heart defect, tragically, completely unrelated to the family disease. His grief, his overwhelming sorrow, fueled his obsession to a dangerous degree. He dedicated his life to this project legacy. He irrationally believed Elizabeth's imperfection, her own genetic flaw, had somehow tainted his lineage, even though it made no scientific sense. He was a brilliant geneticist himself, a visionary in his field, but a man driven mad by grief, by centuries of dark tradition, and by the relentless ticking clock of the disease within his own bloodline. He hired the best scientists, illegally of course, operating in complete secrecy, and began what he chillingly called the cultivation. He sought out women with specific genetic profiles, women in desperate situations, much like yours, and offered them immense sums to carry a child to term, a child that would be meticulously screened, even genetically modified to fit his ideal of purity. Amelia, he finally uttered her name, a name that had haunted me for hours, his voice thick with a pain I hadn't known he possessed, a raw emotion that surprised me. She was the first failure under my father's direct supervision. Her child, a boy, had a rare genetic marker that Marcus deemed unacceptable, a deviation from the desired purity. My father, he wasn't a monster who would harm a child, no, but he was ruthless in his pursuit of his twisted goal. He gave Amelia a choice: take a severance payment, a vast sum, and disappear, completely severing all ties, or have her child live a secluded life within the mansion, perpetually monitored, never integrated into the legacy because he wasn't perfect, wasn't the cure. Amelia, heartbroken, desperate, chose the former. She took her son and vanished. I believe she went back to her other child, much like your situation with Ethan. My father paid off her doctors, erased her existence from the family records, buried her story beneath layers of secrecy and wealth. He saw it as a necessary cost, a clean break, a problem solved. The thought of it, even now, it haunts me. His gaze drifted to the ancient charts on the wall, as if seeing Amelia's ghostly image there. He confessed that he himself had been tested relentlessly as a child, subjected to his father's obsessive genetic screenings, poked and prodded, always living under the terrifying shadow of the inherited disease and the legacy's crushing demands. He felt like a genetic specimen, he admitted, not a son, his own humanity stripped away by his father's relentless pursuit. When my father died, Julian said, his eyes distant, fixed on some unseen horizon, the burden fell to me. The disease is real, Reagan. It's not some ancient superstition. My younger brother Daniel was diagnosed 2 years ago. Early stages, but it's progressive, debilitating. There's no known cure. My father's scientists, the ones I inherited along with the rest of the Vance empire, they believed that a specific genetic combination in a new heir might unlock a pathway to a cure, or at least a treatment that could halt its progression. They showed me the data. The research, as unethical as its origins were, had yielded some promising preliminary results, hinting at a breakthrough. I saw it as my last chance, my only way to save Daniel, to honor the legacy I was born into without perpetuating its more abhorrent methods, without discarding human lives. I didn't want to repeat my father's mistakes. I didn't want to discard a child. I needed a viable path. And you, Reagan, with your unique genetic markers, according to their complex models, you were the most promising match for the next step in their research. My only objective was to get the necessary biological material from the child to continue the research for Daniel, to give him a fighting chance. I truly intended to ensure you and your child were well cared for, financially secure, just separated. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence between us. His story was a sprawling tapestry woven with threads of ancient curses, cutting-edge modern science, and a desperate brother's love, all twisted by a madman's legacy. It didn't excuse his actions, not entirely, not for the pain he had caused me, for the terror he had inflicted. But it painted a picture of a man trapped. A man who, like me, had made unthinkable choices out of desperation, albeit a different kind of desperation, a gilded desperation. My anger warred with a nascent empathy, a confusing swirl of emotions. He hadn't been acting out of pure malice, not from the root of it, but out of a misguided, desperate attempt to save his brother, caught and bound by the terrifying logic of his family's dark inheritance. The shocking discovery wasn't just about Julian, it was about generations of Vances, cursed and desperate, making extreme choices for survival, perpetuating a cycle of fear and unethical practices. It was a cycle I was now inextricably part of. The weight of Julian's confession settled between us, heavy and complex, like an ancient shroud draped over the opulent silence of his study. The initial shock had given way to a storm of conflicting emotions within me, a burning rage at the deception, a primal fear for my unborn child, but also, surprisingly, a raw, painful empathy for the man who sat before me, his usual composure shattered, revealing the profound, generational burden he carried. He wasn't a monster, not in the way I'd imagined when I first set foot in this gilded cage. He was a product of his twisted inheritance, a prisoner of a dark legacy, driven by a desperate, heartbreaking love for his brother. But that I knew didn't erase his actions, or the casual, almost clinical cruelty of the contract that had so carelessly bought my body and my future. "So what now, Julian?" I asked, my voice flat, almost devoid of emotion, carefully masking the turmoil churning inside me. "You've explained your reasons. It doesn't change the fact that I was bought, that my child is an experiment, or that Amelia was discarded, her life erased. What is your plan for us now, for Project Legacy, for Daniel?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate plea, a rare vulnerability. He seemed to be searching for something in my gaze, some hint of understanding, of forgiveness. "I want to end it, Reagan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with conviction. "All of it. The unethical research, the cultivation, the secrecy, the cold, calculating way my family has operated for generations. My father's legacy, the dark, abhorrent side of it, ends with me." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "But I need the research to continue legitimately, ethically. For Daniel, he's my brother. And if our child carries the key, the specific genetic markers that could unlock a pathway to a cure, I need to understand it. But not at the cost of his or your humanity. Never again." His words were a startling admission of defeat, a profound surrender of centuries of advanced tradition, a rejection of the very foundations of his family's power. Over the next few days, our interactions transformed from guarded, tense exchanges to intense, marathon discussions that often stretched late into the night. We were no longer buyer and bought, captor and captive, but two individuals caught in a terrifying, intricate web, desperate to find a way out together, to dismantle the insidious threads that bound us. Julian brought in his top legal team, not to enforce the old, monstrous contract, but to tear it apart, clause by agonizing clause, and draft a new one, this time with me at the table, my demands front and center, non-negotiable. My conditions were clear, laid out with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. Full custody and parental rights. The child would be our child, legally and emotionally. No relinquishment, no separation. We would co-parent. Ethan's integration. Ethan, my sweet boy, would move into the mansion, become a part of our new, unconventional family. He would be safe, cared for, and loved, his future finally secure. Ethical research. Any research into the child's genetics for Daniel's sake would be strictly overseen by independent medical ethics boards, transparent, non-invasive, and with my full informed consent at every step. If it posed any risk to the child, it would stop immediately. Truth and transparency, no more secrets. We would confront the Vance family's hidden history, and if necessary, expose the unethical parts of Project Legacy to the world, ensuring it never happened again, ensuring no other woman or child suffered Amelia's fate. Julian, to my profound astonishment, agreed to every single point. He seemed genuinely relieved, almost lighter, as if a monumental weight had been lifted from his shoulders, freeing him to shed the heavy, suffocating cloak of his family's dark past. We worked tirelessly, side by side with his formidable lawyers, to dismantle the old contract's oppressive clauses and construct a new framework built on mutual respect, newfound trust, and a fragile shared future. He began liquidating some of his father's more obscure, ethically questionable investments, diverting massive funds to legitimate cutting-edge medical research foundations dedicated to neurological disorders. Not just the Vance family's specific ailment, but broader, more ethical studies that could help countless others. He started seeing specialists for Daniel, not just the family scientists who were bound by the legacy, seeking broader, more compassionate approaches to his brother's illness. Our emotional connection deepened exponentially through this shared crisis. It wasn't the slow, gentle bloom of conventional romance, but a fierce, desperate bond forged in the crucible of fear and shared purpose. We had seen the worst of each other, my raw desperation, his family's chilling secrets, his own complicity in a twisted system. And yet we were choosing to build something new, something profoundly hopeful from the wreckage. He showed me tenderness, a quiet protectiveness I hadn't anticipated, a depth of feeling hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed indifference. He'd bring me warm milk in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, simply sit with me in silence as I worried aloud about the future, offering a reassuring presence. I, in turn, found myself offering him comfort, a listening ear, a quiet understanding of the immense burden he was finally choosing to shed, a burden that had warped his life. The atmosphere in the mansion visibly shifted, subtly, but undeniably. The cold formality that had once permeated every stone wall began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious, tentative warmth. Mrs. Albright, sensing the profound change between us, offered genuine smiles and shared quiet moments of relief, her eyes brighter. The medical team, now operating under new, stricter ethical guidelines, treated me with newfound respect, no longer just a biological vessel, but a partner in this complex journey. As my due date approached, the terror of the impending birth mixed with a profound, almost overwhelming sense of anticipation. It wasn't just a child I was about to bring into the world. It was a new future, a chance at redemption for Julian and a second chance at happiness at a real family for me and Ethan. We were truly in this together, two broken people trying to mend a family, not just biologically, but emotionally, legally, and ethically. The path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. The lingering threat of the genetic disease, the complex legal battles to expose the truth about Project Legacy and ensure it never rose again, the challenges of blending our two vastly different lives into one cohesive unit. But for the first time since I stepped into that horrifying auction hall, I felt a powerful, unwavering hope. I was no longer a pawn. I was a partner, a force shaping our destiny, one difficult, courageous step at a time. The final days leading up to the birth were a blur of heightened emotion, a poignant mix of lingering fear and exhilarating anticipation. Julian was a constant, reassuring presence, his hand often finding mine, his touch a silent promise of support, his gaze filled with a quiet strength that steadied my trembling nerves. The medical team, now feeling like genuine allies rather than clinical overseers, guided me through the final preparations with a warmth I hadn't expected. The nursery, once a blank canvas of sterile white, had been transformed under my guidance, blossoming into a warm, inviting space filled with soft blues and yellows, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, and gentle, whimsical toys. Ethan had even helped pick out a small, fluffy lamb mobile, his innocent excitement a balm to my soul, a joyous anticipation that mirrored my own. He was set to arrive at the mansion just days after the baby, a final piece of our new beginning falling into place. When the labor began, it was intense, primal, and utterly consuming, stripping away all pretense and leaving only raw instinct. But this time I wasn't alone. Julian refused to leave my side, defying the clinical detachment of the hospital room. His composure, usually so unyielding, softened into genuine tenderness. He held my hand, his grip firm and comforting, a lifeline. He wiped my brow with a cool cloth, whispering words of encouragement, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of contractions. "You're doing wonderfully, Reagan," he murmured, his voice husky. "Just breathe, I'm here, we're here." His presence, unwavering and real, made all the difference, transforming the ordeal into something shared. It wasn't a transaction, it was a partnership, a shared journey into a new life. Hours later, the room filled with the most miraculous sound I had ever heard, the vigorous, demanding cry of a newborn. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the ecstatic, relieved faces of the medical staff. Julian looked up from where he stood beside the bed, a tiny, squalling bundle in his arms. His own eyes were brimming with unshed tears, a look of profound wonder and overwhelming emotion transforming his usually stoic features, softening them into something I barely recognized. He was no longer the ruthless billionaire. He was just a father, completely undone by the miracle of his child, lost in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. "He's beautiful, Reagan. Perfect," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion as he gently, carefully placed our son into my arms. Our son. The words resonated in my heart, a melody of pure, unblemished joy. He was a tiny, perfect miracle, surprisingly robust, with a full head of dark hair and a robust cry that promised life, vibrance, and a future I now dared to dream of. As I held him close, his small body warm against mine, a wave of profound, absolute peace washed over me, settling deep within my bones. This was it. This was everything I had fought for, everything I had endured, every sacrifice made. Just as I was savoring that sacred moment, the door to the hospital room creaked open and a small, curious face peeked through. It was Ethan. He must have arrived earlier than planned, unable to wait a moment longer. His eyes, wide with wonder, fixated on the tiny baby in my arms. He ran towards us, his excitement bubbling over. Julian, with tears still glistening in his eyes, a radiant smile on his face, effortlessly lifted Ethan into his arms, pulling him into a tight, warm hug. "Ethan, meet your baby brother," he said, his voice husky with emotion, brimming with paternal pride. Ethan giggled, his small hand reaching out a tiny, tentative finger to touch the baby's soft cheek. Julian looked at me, a soft, profound smile spreading across his face. "Reagan," he began, his voice clear and resonant, even amidst the happy chaos of the room. He knelt beside my bed, still holding Ethan, who now looked between us with wide, curious, innocent eyes. Sensing the immense shift in the air, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath hitched, my heart soaring with a sudden, dizzying hope. "Reagan Knight," he continued, his voice filled with a raw sincerity, a deep, abiding love that melted away every last vestige of my fear and doubt. "You walked into my life out of desperation, a last, desperate hope. And you shattered my carefully constructed world of logic and legacy. You showed me the true meaning of courage, compassion, and family. You made me see a future I never dared to dream of, a future filled with warmth and light." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant diamond ring sparkling in the soft light. "Will you marry me, Reagan? Will you make us a real family forever?" Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, boundless joy. My heart pounded with a happiness so profound it defied words, too big for my chest. I could barely speak, but my voice came out clear, unwavering, imbued with all the love and hope I felt. "Yes, Julian, 1,000 times yes." Ethan, who had been listening intently, his eyes wide, beamed at our response. "We're going to be a real family," he exclaimed, burying his face first in Julian's shoulder then mine, giggling with delight. Julian laughed, a deep, joyful sound I'd never heard from him before, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness, and hugged us both tightly, a complete, messy, beautiful embrace. In that small hospital room, surrounded by the overwhelming love of our newfound family, we celebrated not just a birth, but the beginning of a new chapter, one that was forged in desperation and fear, but had ripened miraculously into true, unconditional love. The months leading up to our wedding were filled with a chaotic, joyous energy that vibrated through the mansion. The grand house, once a cold, imposing fortress, now hummed and vibrated with life and laughter. Ethan, quickly adapting to his new home, became a fiercely protective older brother, constantly doting on his baby brother, eager to show him toys and make him laugh. Julian surprisingly proved to be a natural father, his rigid demeanor softening completely in the presence of his children. He read bedtime stories in a surprisingly gentle voice, engaged in boisterous playtime on the sprawling rugs, and embraced the beautiful messiness of family life with an almost childlike wonder. He was no longer just the formidable billionaire. He was our Julian. We held a private, intimate ceremony in the mansion's vast conservatory, bathed in the soft, ethereal light filtering through the glass dome. The lush greenery Julian had once tended with such quiet solitude now formed a vibrant backdrop for our vows. Mrs. Albright stood by my side, beaming, her eyes shining with silent tears, a testament to the profound transformation she had witnessed within these walls. Julian's younger brother, Daniel, frail but smiling, was also there, a poignant reminder of the battle Julian was still fighting, but now with profound hope and a vast support system that extended beyond the Vance legacy. The dark chapters of Project Legacy were being systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. Julian had established new, ethical research initiatives, pouring his vast resources into legitimate scientific endeavors to combat the neurological disease that had haunted his family for centuries, ensuring no more lives would be bought, manipulated, or discarded in the name of a twisted quest for purity. The truth about his father's abhorrent methods was slowly, carefully being revealed to relevant authorities, with Julian taking full responsibility for rectifying past wrongs, a courageous act of atonement. It was a long road fraught with challenges, but we faced it together, hand in hand. As the sun set on our wedding day, casting a golden, warm glow through the glass dome of the conservatory, Julian and I danced under the twinkling fairy lights strung among the exotic orchids. Ethan, tired but happy, leaned against Julian's leg, watching his parents with sleepy contentment, a secure smile on his face. This was the start of everything I had ever dreamed of, a life built not on a cold, dehumanizing contract, but on choice, on trust, and on a love that had defied every odd, every expectation, every dark secret. "It's only the beginning," Julian whispered, holding my hand tightly, his gaze sweeping over our little family. The baby nestled in a bassinet nearby, Ethan half asleep on his leg. And as I looked at him, at our children, surrounded by the love of our friends and the quiet support of our chosen family, I knew he was right. Our journey, born from desperation and fear, had blossomed into a beautiful, vibrant reality, a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring strength of love. And so, we closed the chapter on Chloe and Julian's extraordinary journey, a journey that began in the sterile halls of an auction and blossomed amidst the hidden secrets of a sprawling mansion. Chloe's story is a raw, powerful testament to the unwavering strength of a mother's love, the sheer courage it takes to confront unimaginable darkness, and the profound resilience of the human spirit. She walked into a nightmare, but she fought to build a dream. Julian, too, faced his own demons, bound by a legacy that threatened to consume him. His transformation reminds us that even those who seem unyielding can choose compassion, that even the most deeply ingrained patterns can be broken when confronted with truth and a different kind of love. Their path was anything but conventional, yet it proves that true family isn't always about blood, but about connection, choice, and the willingness to fight for a future built on genuine respect. What do you think was the most pivotal moment in Chloe's fight for her children and her own freedom? Did Julian's confession change your perception of him? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Your insights truly matter. If this story moved you, If it sparked a flicker of hope or a deeper understanding, please give this video a like. And to join us on more incredible journeys that explore the complexities of the human heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life.